Hi there, my name's Ben and I like to read. Today we're going to be reviewing the second book in Frank Herbert's Dune series, and that is Dune Messiah. So I'm not going to delve into a huge background about the lore of the book. I've already covered a lot of that in my first video, so feel free to go back and check that one out. Same thing with background on the author. We're just going to pick up right where we left off on our last video. So, where Dune left off is Paul Atreides has finally ascended to the throne of to be the Emperor of the known universe, and he has made Arrakis his capital. However, because he is now the Emperor, although he has supreme power and he is omniscient, he can see the future, he's powerless to prevent it. And this leads to his Fremen legions being unleashed upon the solar systems of humanity, the colonized worlds, in what can only be described as a genocide, although they describe it as a holy war. In this, I believe the exact numbers were 60 billion lives taken, entire planetary systems laid to waste, and this is all within a 12-year span of his reign. Throughout that time as well, there have been institutions that have been built up around Paul, or his Fremen name, of course, is Muad'Dib. There's a church now. There are inquisitors. He is a living god to very, very many people. But of course, there is trouble in paradise. He has taken the daughter of the previous emperor as his wife, yet he refuses to touch her, interact with her. He doesn't. He's not having any children with her. He's made it very, very clear that the mother of his children was his girlfriend from the previous book. Her name is Chani, and they have been trying to get pregnant for some time. Hasn't been working because Irulan, his princess wife, has been sneaking contraceptives into her diet. Now, while this is happening, of course, the previous emperor was exiled to Seleucia Secundus, which was the home planet of the Sardaukar. The Sardaukar themselves have been disbanded. They're only allowed to keep a small force. However, they are plotting their return to the throne with the help of a quote-unquote Fremen conspiracy. So these are groups of Fremen who have come to resent Paul Muad'Dib and the Atreides rule on Arrakis. They wish to go back to the original goal of terraforming Arrakis and of being independent. And to that end, they're working with members from the Spacing Guild, the guys who are in charge of interplanetary travel. They're working with the Princess Irulan to a certain extent. And they're also working with this race called the Tleilaxu, who are these... They're a race that... They're hard to describe. They inhabit the planet of Beni Tleilax, but their technology sort of pushes the line between thinking machine and not. They're very adept at cloning, and clones are called golas, and they're very good at creating synthetic body parts. Tleilaxu eyes are made of metal, and they're very, very good, and they are better than human eyes. But that motif is very prominent in this book as well. The concept of blindness. Because again, according to Fremen tradition, a blind Fremen must walk out into the desert and meet Shai-Hulud, their god, which is of course their sandworm, which they worship. So all of this is happening within the confines of Paul's palace and beyond. Essentially, the plot of this book follows Paul's increasing anxiety with regards to the future that he sees for humanity. He sees that humanity is right now on a path that will eventually lead to its extinction because they're under the influence of people who are people like him who are prescient, people like the Bene Tleilax, like the Emperor, who will lead humanity off a course, and they will, which will eventually lead into humanity stagnating and eventually going extinct and being vulnerable to other potential dangers, I should say. We have to keep in mind as well that even though he's the ruler of the known universe, there are still many other star systems that have not been colonized. And of course, there's no real room for aggressive expansion, just because, again, that requires massive quantities of spice and so on and so forth. Essentially, the book follows the conspiracy unfolds. A coup is launched against Paul, an assassination attempt, where they use a stone burner, which is essentially a high-powered atomic device, which they explode in the middle of the Capitol. Paul ends up surviving, but it burns his eyes. He decides not to take Tleilaxu eyes. However, he's not technically considered blind because he can still see the future. And through his visions of the future, he can it's almost like sonar. He can see his way around there. All the while, there is a very important subplot is the reintroduction, is this gift that he's given by the Bene Tleilax, this Gola of his father's old retainer, Duncan Idaho, who died in the first book. And this Gola has been trained as a mentat, but is also programmed to, when the time is right, to kill Paul Atreides, Paul Muad'Dib. And then, of course, at the end, he's struggling with his to foil the plot. He ends up foiling it to a certain extent because he foresees his concubine Chani giving birth to a daughter. She does end up giving birth. Unfortunately, she dies in childbirth, but she ends up giving birth to twins, to a boy and a girl, who are born with the same abilities as Paul and his sister Alia, because again, his wife was ingesting a spice-heavy diet, and spice, when you ingest spice and you're pregnant, there is a very strong chance for your children to become preborn, which means that their consciousness is already awakened in the womb, and they have access to the genetic memories of their of the past. And this is more so important in the later books, but it puts you at risk for something called abomination, where you can have the genetic spirit of one of your ancestors take over you and possess you. And of course, if they're malignant, it's very, very dangerous. And of course, a big plot point, which I didn't reveal in the previous episode, was that it is determined that the Baron Harkonnen, the archenemy of Paul's family, is in fact Paul's grandfather. So, of course, now that he is fully in tune with all of his genetic ancestors, and so are his children, it puts them both at risk for the Baron to come back and to take over. However, at the end of the book, as well, like I said, Paul manages to foil the assassination plot and the conspiracy, but because his vision was wrong, his vision of the future was wrong, he only foresaw the birth of a daughter, not twins. He's accepted the fact that, okay, yes, I am truly blind now, and rather than continue to hold on to his position, which he's come to resent, this position of absolute power, but also of absolute powerlessness, he decides to become a true Fremen, and he casts off the mantle of responsibility and walks out into the desert. And the book ends there. I really, this is probably my favorite book out of the out of the three that I've read so far. I mean, the first Dune was just absolutely fantastic, and if you've seen my previous video on that, you're going to know that I absolutely adore it. The reason why I like Dune Messiah is because this is where you can really see what I was speaking about in the previous video. Now we're treated to a world that has been enthralled, enslaved, captured by this charismatic leader for 12 years. And because even though he's omniscient, he's far from omnipotent. And it really does, Paul Atreides almost embodies a Hamlet type aspect. He has so much data flowing at him, which is weird because he was trained as a mentat. He should be able to collate it fairly well. But this is also interspersed with visions from the future, visions of a path, a dark path and a golden one that humanity is going down, and he has to make a choice in order to, as the Kwisatz Haderach, in order to be humanity's leader throughout that. And eventually you can see at the end of the book, he rejects that responsibility. And walks off into the desert as a man rather than as a god. That's the central conflict of the book. Is like, okay, we have this charismatic leader, this living god, this person who has powers that no one should be capable of having, and yet again, Muad'Dib is just a man. People in the book have idealized the concept of Muad'Dib as sacrosanct, as something that has become dogmatic. And in this case, Herbert offers throughout the Dune series a very, very strong critique of religion and of charismatic movements, because again, the masses are easily swayed by these types of people. They're easily manipulated. And Paul, in essence, even though he's the most powerful human politically and, even supernaturally, even physically, in the universe, he doesn't know how to effectively use that power. He doesn't know how to harness it. He leaves the administration of his empire to his sister, his old bodyguard back in the days where he was a guerrilla leader. They've now set up a church. They run his household. And they have even bought into their own ideology that, yes, Muad'Dib is God, and even if Muad'Dib were to commit heresy against himself, he would have to be taken out. And they are smart enough, and they end up realizing, okay, we can take Paul out and still keep in this power structure that we've created. And it's just, even though it's only 300 odd pages. So it's a third of the length of the previous book. My God, it's got some very, very compelling. It's got a crazy compelling plot, a true conspiracy plot, and I really, really appreciated that, because it reads zippy and quicky, and it's really quickly, I should say, and it's a very taut political thriller almost in this case. There's a beautiful sequence as well where they're meeting with where this Tleilaxu face dancer, this being that can change its appearance and genetic composition at will. So it can be a man or a woman depending on how it feels. He's talking to this Fremen, this old Fremen commander that served under Paul, and because he has to give him some information to advance the conspiracy, and he's describing how they were on this world that was pregnant with water. And I mean, most Fremen have never even seen a river, let alone a lush ocean planet. They've never even seen green before, and he's describing how they saw the sea for the first time. And so obviously they didn't know how to react. So some of them went in there and they started drinking it and vomiting because of the salt and everything. And he was describing how there were priests there with them, almost like the religious commissars of the army, of Muad'Dib's legions that were there, sort of, giving sermons and all of that crap. But the way that he was describing how he knew at that point that, okay, this has gone too far now. And so he describes how he steps into the ocean and almost like washes his sins off and has become reborn again as a true Fremen, and he knows what he has to do. It's such compelling writing. Frank Herbert has an unbelievable gift with words. If you really enjoyed Dune, you're going to love Dune Messiah. I really, really enjoyed this one. It doesn't have that... It doesn't seem that it has this vast scope anymore, but I think that's the reason why the first book was so long, because you needed all of that to build the world. As soon as I picked this up, it was almost like, okay, yeah, I'm right back into there. I can hop right back into that movie in my head and right back into that world, and the characters can play around in it, and it's just, yeah, I really enjoyed it. If you liked Dune, and if you liked the first book, you're going to love this one. Do not skip out on it. Like I said, call your family, call your side bitches, call everyone, get this book. This is my favorite one of the series, I have to say. If you liked it and you read it, let me know what your thoughts were in the comments below. And if this review has compelled you to pick up a second Frank Herbert book, please do pick it up and read it, and let me know what your thoughts were in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.